Yeah, all good. All good. Nice, peaceful early evening walk here. Just gone for a nice, peaceful early evening walk. Easter Monday. It's a beautiful day. Gone for a long walk around there and just made my way back here. And yeah, I've been reflecting on a sort of question I've been asked on several occasions about the differences in training environment between men's football and women's football. And I suppose I can only answer it anecdotally based on my own experience. And it's probably a challenging question. There's so many variables to take into consideration. Obviously, the clubs, the level of clubs, and so on and so forth. So I can only sort of give sort of my own sort of anecdotal experience and a sort of snapshot based on my experience of working in men's professional football, in semi-pro football in men's, and obviously women's football team in women's football was a fourth tier part-time. So I think taking all that into consideration, I'm not here to give advice or making a suggestion, just sort of my own experiences. One of the things I would sort of reflect on is that resources. Now, I suppose if I compare the T4 professional club I work at comparatively to, say, the T4 women's club, Barnes Women's Football Club, then yeah, the resources, you've got a lot more resources, obviously at men's T4 because it's professional. So you've got obviously more staff, more resources, more equipment, and so on and so forth. But that's to be expected because obviously it's professional. Women's T4, we are sort of worked out, was still sort of part-time, but a really professional mentality, some great staff. So there's no doubt about it, but it is what it is. Obviously, funding is a big thing. So, but it's probably more comparable to say non-league men's team, lower down the steps. Excuse me, you lower down the sort of steps. Probably more comparable to that, I would say. But that's not to sort of undermine the professionalism. And that might be different at sort of different levels of the game. No doubt the women's game, the highest level, they'll have an abundance of resources and stuff and so on and so forth. But obviously sort of, funding is a big thing taken into consideration. So resources is one key thing. I suppose in the women's game from a psychological perspective, it's probably more communal in the sense that in the men's game, in my experience, it's more, built around, 3 or 4 players. You've got the supporting cast, whereas women's more communal in the sense that, there's sort of more of a communal feel about the team, about the games, about the environment. I would say my experience, because my experience in the women's game was over 3 seasons, and the role was sort of different to what I had in the men's game, in professional level and non-league. So in the women's game, it was more like well-being and preparing mentally for, games. I've games sort of once a week, but I would chip in other areas too, as and when I could, to be fair, because obviously I've got vast amounts of experience across various areas, but you're mindful of staying within your remit, but obviously in the environment sort of chip in where you can as well. So I've made observations too in terms of coaching and other stuff too. I would say one of the key things, the women's game is probably they're more inquisitive in terms of, say, they're more inquisitive. They want to know the why you're doing sort of this, rather than in the men's game it's more like, well, what to do, tell them the process of what to do. Women, they might ask you like why they're doing, which is not a good or bad thing. It's just, it is what it is in my experience. On the physical side, I brought some of the staff from where I work at university. I brought some of the staff in to do some fitness testing, and that went pretty well. It was really interesting. I suppose the levels were pretty good. The data suggested the levels were pretty good, so to speak. Obviously sort of different comparatively to sort of the men's game. I mean, the one thing, so I suppose you could argue, sort of started my career in the men's game as a sort of fitness coach, but that kind of evolved over time. But I would say that obviously it's, difficult to make comparisons from a physiological perspective. But one thing I did found, and this is sort of anecdotal, it might be different for different, it might be interesting to see some research done in it. When the 2 lecturers come down from the uni I work at, from the fitness department, sports science, to do some fitness testing, it was quite interesting because I found like in women's data, a lower hamstring quadricep strength ratio. So that obviously would have implications. That was the case across the board. But that's one for the sports scientist to sort of think about. But if you've got any insights into that, it'd be sort of great to hear. But that's what I found when I looked at the data. But that's anecdotal on a small sample. so to speak. Obviously, there's the biological impact of to consider the menstrual cycle, hormonal. I interviewed a couple of pretty good sports scientists, people involved in sports science, and we had top people at Barnsley Women Football Club in sports science, and yeah, they sort of talked about how that's a factor in terms of injury, correlation to injury. So I think it's sort of in the planning. Obviously, you don't have that in the men's game, sort of for planning. And also the subject load, I would say too. It's like you talk about the rate of perceived exertion. So you're sort of constantly more communicating, and it's more subjective rather than the data driven. In the men's game, it's more objective in terms of you look at the data in the planning, to training. And I read somewhere, because I spoke to a lot of people when I sort of went on board, and like I said, my remit there was more about well-being and preparing mentally for games. But I'd go out to the training pitch now and again, have a look and chip in where I could, and helped out a bit here and there, based on sort of my remit in other areas too, like the fitness and that sort of stuff, where I could, because you kind of muck in where you can help. But I would say I read one time that the ACL injury risk is up to 2 to 8 times more likely for women to sort of tear than compared to the male players. So I suppose with that in mind, you're probably thinking, okay, well, that's where sort of warm-ups and targeting neuromuscular sort of training is sort of essential. But that's another story for another day, and that's sort of over the sports science type thing to think about. But that's just sort of my own reading in that area as well. So so they're like some of the things as well. There's many other things, no doubt, that you can think of. They're sort of off the top of my head, things that I can think of based on my own experience. As I said earlier before, my role in remit was different in professional football, semi-pro football, and obviously sort of in the women's game. So that would probably influence the way I see things, and it's my subjective outlook, and also, the role for me in the women's game was going along once a week and doing some medical condition work, mindfulness, doing some preparing mentally for games. But I did sort of get a bit more involved and had the sports science department from where the uni I work at come down and do some fitness testing and sort of help out with that, and go out and watch some of the training, the games, and that sort of stuff. Obviously sort of like the men's game, more power, more pace in that respect physiologically. But you'd be surprised, the women's game's like, really be surprised I think in that respect, if anyone sort of hasn't been involved and thinks otherwise, it can be quick. Men's game's probably obviously quick in transition, but when it gets to sort of the tactical side of the game, that's probably more implications around that. But that's sort of my take on it. What I would say is that, definitely all the professionalism, certainly my time at Barnsley Women's Football Club, fantastic place, definitely, really professional environment, top people, and some of the best coaches, certainly, top level coaches, top people. One thing that I sort of, didn't realise till I sort of went on board was sort of like the level of some of the coaches in that environment were just exceptional, outstanding, and the players' professionalism, dedication as well. Really, really, great environment to work in for sure. So yeah, that's just a couple of my take on it. You might see it differently, but great to hear what your take is on it as well. But yeah, that's my take on it.